The dust settled on the wooden floor of the saloon as three men pushed through the doors, their spurs jingling with each deliberate step. In the corner, hunched over a worn Bible and a cup of cold coffee, sat Margaret O'Brien, 73 years old, dressed in the black she'd worn for 15 years since her husband died. The youngest gunslinger, a boy barely 20 with more arrogance than sense, laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. They called themselves the Garrett brothers, though only two shared blood. They'd been terrorizing small towns across Montana for months, robbing banks, burning homesteads, leaving widows and orphans in their wake. The eldest, Clayton, had a particular hatred for the O'Brien name. Margaret's late husband, Sheriff Thomas O'Brien, had killed Clayton's father in a fair duel 30 years prior. Revenge, even delayed by decades, tasted sweet to men with nothing but bitterness in their souls. Margaret didn't look up from her Bible. Her hands, weathered and spotted with age, trembled slightly as she turned a page. To the Garretts, she looked like every easy target they'd ever found. Old, alone, afraid. They didn't know that those trembling hands had once been the steadiest in 3 territories. They didn't know that before Thomas O'Brien became sheriff, Margaret Hayes had been something else entirely. Clayton approached her table slowly, savoring the moment. The saloon had gone deathly quiet, 15 witnesses holding their breath. He placed both hands on her table and leaned down, his whiskey-soaked breath washing over her wrinkled face. He told her she had 2 choices, come outside and die quick or die right here where she sat. Either way, the O'Brien name would be wiped from history tonight. Margaret finally looked up, and something in her pale blue eyes made Clayton hesitate. They weren't the eyes of a frightened old woman. They were the eyes of someone who had seen death so many times they'd become old friends. She asked quietly if she could finish her coffee first. The 3 men erupted in laughter, and Clayton magnanimously agreed. After all, what harm could an old widow do with 30 seconds? What they didn't see was Margaret's foot slowly moving beneath the table, nudging aside the false floorboard that Thomas had installed decades ago, the one only she knew about. What they did and hear beneath their own laughter was the soft click as her boot touched the modified holster hidden in the hollow space below. She took her last sip of coffee, cold and bitter as the years she'd spent alone. Then she stood slowly, her joints creaking, playing the part perfectly. Clayton stepped back, his hand hovering near his gun, but still smiling. His brothers flanked him, confident and cruel. They were fast, these 3. They'd killed 17 men between them, all in fair draws. But fair didn't mean much when you never faced someone who learned to shoot before your parents were born. Margaret's voice was steady as she spoke. She told them about Thomas, about the man he'd been before the badge, about the promise she'd made him on his deathbed. She'd promised to hang up her guns forever, to live the quiet life he'd always wanted for her. She'd kept that promise for 15 years, even as men like the Garretts terrorized the innocent. But promises made to the dead don't bind you when the living need protecting. Then she told them who she really was. Margaret Hayes, the ghost of Abilene. The woman who'd ridden with the Pinkerton Agency before it was respectable for women to ride anywhere. The woman who'd brought in 43 outlaws, 22 of them still breathing. The woman whose hands stopped trembling the moment they touched iron. Clayton's smile died. His hand dropped toward his gun, and his brothers moved simultaneously, 3 men drawing against one old woman in black. It should have been murder. Instead, it became legend. Margaret's hand disappeared beneath her shawl and emerged with a cold peacemaker that seemed to materialize from nowhere. The first shot caught Clayton in the shoulder before his gun cleared leather. The second took the middle brother in his shooting hand, the revolver flying across the room. The third dropped the youngest brother to his knees, his legs suddenly unable to hold him. 3 shots, 3 hits, and not one of the Garretts had managed to fire back. The saloon erupted in chaos, but Margaret stood perfectly still, smoke curling from her barrel, her hands steady as stone. She'd aimed to wound, not kill. Death was easy. Living with defeat, with humiliation, with the knowledge that everything you believed about yourself was a lie, that was the harder sentence. The marshal arrived to find 3 legendary gunfighters disarmed by a woman old enough to be their grandmother. As they were hauled away, Margaret sat back down at her table, reloaded her gun with practiced ease, and returned it to its hiding place. She ordered a fresh cup of coffee, hot this time, and reopened her Bible. A young waitress approached nervously, asking if she was really the ghost of Abilene. Margaret smiled for the first time in what felt like years. She said that Margaret Hayes had died 15 years ago when Thomas did. She was just Margaret O'Brien now, a widow who wanted to read her Bible in peace. But if trouble came looking for her again, well, ghosts had a way of coming back when they were needed. News of the shootout spread across Montana like wildfire. The Garrett brothers became laughingstocks, the men outdone by a grandmother. But more importantly, other outlaws began to wonder how many other quiet widows and aging farmers had histories they'd hidden away. How many easy targets weren't easy at all. Margaret lived another 12 years in that small town and never once had to draw her gun again. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in the fight itself.